about that. So how do people use this, and how do you manage it, and what do you actually put in your data processing catalog? And you can, part of this is we're operating under an assumption that you've got multiple different kind of sources of processes you want to document. So you may have part of your organization that uses Tableau to create reports. Another part of your organization has a data warehouse that has like business objects hooked up to it. You've got transactional reports that are running straight out of your ERP. You also have a series of ETL processes that are getting run for your warehouse, and another set of imports and exports that are being run by a transactional group. And all these things have different tools and different teams that are working on them, and they may have their own kind of native documentation upon each of those tools. Like, oh, if I go into Tableau, I can see all the Tableau reports that are there. If I go into the business object, I can see all the reports that are there. If I go look at our MuleSoft that's running the integration, I can see the documentation there. But for someone who's trying to understand all the data, they would need to kind of have access to all of that, all of those tools, know about their existence, know how to get into them, right? So part of the primary best practice is to centralize information about the existence of all of those and what's in those in one central place. So that's your centralized data processing catalog. So the first thing the part about this for a use is to do an inventory, right? So identify, here are all the different places where we're, the different things that we're doing, the different types of reports or imports or extracts and tools that we have. And then a primary use is to maybe to import them, right? And not everybody does this, but you want to have like a central place to where you've got information about the existence of, and at least a minimal amount of information about what all of those, what reports and things exist in those various things. So you can kind of do a search and locate at a central place, right? So if you don't remember if some report was done on Tableau or done in Business Object or the warehouse, you can search in one place to see what exists. And then if you find it, then you can go locate and access it and either run it, or maybe you want to access it to go look at the details of the technical things to make a change to it. So one of the things about that inventory process is that the inventory is really about kind of bringing in the raw information about the existence and whatever kind of content is easily imported from those source systems. Most of the time, the source systems like that, there's not a whole lot of rich documentation from a human readable standpoint in a lot of them. You might have the queries or the queries, or some things that you can imply by how the formatting is, but there's not good curated content about the purpose of it, the definitions of the things, why it was written, who owns it, how to get, all that kind of rich information isn't always there. Sometimes it is. But at the minimum, you want to understand about the existence of it, sort of whatever kind of descriptions or details you can to help with search. And then it's okay if you want to like link back, if you have a way to link back to that report for additional information that's in there, like, oh, here's a link to the code or a link to whatever, right? If you can import that stuff, that's great, but you don't always have to. You don't have to entirely replicate it, as long as you can, you're able to identify it and then link to it. And also, you don't always necessarily have to inventory everything. It depends on what your goal is, if your starting point is the central catalog or not. Okay, so the second point is curation, right? And this is where you have a report that someone developed in Tableau, and now if you looked at that report, you can kind of see the label, you can see that maybe a minimal one-line description, and you can see the underlying queries if you've got the ability to kind of link that and figure that out. But there's, as I mentioned, usually not a lot of context there. So it's really helpful if you want to add this additional curated information, the purpose of the report, the description of it, who owns it, what's the definition or glossary entries of the things that are on it, what are maybe there's some policy attributes, like what's the security classification of this report? Does it require a data sharing agreement? What's our data retention policy on this information? Does it have any PII or stuff like that? What's the usage of it? All kinds of other information you can capture and track around it. So this is something that has a lot of value to add into your data processing catalog to document this additional curated information about that report, so that if someone's looking at it, they can come figure out, like, well, I don't understand how this works and what it does. Right. The next thing in the processing catalog is sort of requests. So if I'm looking at the report, I don't see what's there. I don't see an existing report, or I see a report and I want something to change. I can request a new report, or I can request a change to the report, or I can actually request curation on the report, or I can request that it gets run, or I can request access to it. These are all sorts of things that you can sort of request to have happen to, either from things that you find in the catalog or things that aren't there that you want to have added or changed. So as you're processing that request, you're going to go through and add, additional documentation and curation and information as part of interacting with that catalog. The next thing is sort of a design and build. So once if someone has made this request for a new report, you're going to go through this process, sort of capturing the requirements and designing what it is, sign off on that, then having it get built and approved. So that's something that's actually really useful to do in kind of the catalog, because you're going to, all this information about requirements and design is something that is essentially curation on the fly during the build, which we'll get back to in a minute. The last kind of purpose for this is the user documentation. So if I'm someone who is looking at a particular report or a particular extract, and I want to, and I've got sort of a deeper question, like, I don't understand what this means, or those numbers don't add up, or explain, that they can sort of link to this additional curated content or other sort of information that provides them then that information right where they live. Or if they don't, then they could possibly have the ability to sort of submit a question, which might equate to a request for additional curation, or maybe a request for a new process, or maybe a request to search for another report or to get access to it or something. So having that information, having your catalog be, provide that inventory, to provide curated additional contact, to manage kind of requests, within this context, and the design and build within the context of this information, and then to provide that user documentation. So that's the main set of areas that you want to accomplish with a data processing catalog.